I remember the exact moment my life changed, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so casual, like it meant nothing. It happened during Sunday dinner, the one we always had at my parents' house. I was balancing bowls of mashed potatoes and gravy when Mom casually said, "Oh, Liv, you'll need to start clearing out your room this week." I blinked. Why? Dad didn't even look up from carving the roast. Mom answered without missing a beat. "Your brother and Kayla need it for the baby. They're starting renovations next weekend." The room fell silent except for the clatter of forks on plates. I stared at her, waiting for a punchline, but there wasn't one. "Wait," I said slowly. "You're giving them my room? Where am I supposed to go?" Mom gave me that soft, condescending smile she used when I was little and didn't understand things. "You're 26, Olivia. You're old enough to make sacrifices for family. That's what sisters do." I looked around the table. Dad kept cutting meat like he hadn't heard a thing. My brother, Josh, just shrugged, and Kayla rubbed her pregnant belly like she was the queen of the evening. "You expect me to move out? Just like that?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Josh sighed. "It's not a big deal, Liv. We just need the space. You can crash on the couch for a while." Crash on the couch. In my own home. For years, I'd stayed to help them. After college, when I could have moved out like my friends did, I stayed because Mom said they needed me. When Dad got sick and needed someone to drive him to appointments, I was there. When Mom needed help with bills, I picked up extra shifts. And now, I was disposable. I excused myself from the table before the tears could show. I locked myself in my room, and stared at the walls I had painted myself years ago, the shelves lined with books, photos, and little pieces of my life. Later that night, Mom knocked on the door like nothing was wrong. "Sweetheart, don't make this difficult. It's not forever. Just until they settle in." "How long is that supposed to be?" I asked without opening the door. "As long as it takes," she said softly. "Family comes first." Family comes first. As long as you weren't me. I packed what I could into the trunk of my car. Clothes, my laptop, a few personal things. My parents didn't even notice me leaving. I heard laughter from the living room as I stepped into the cold night. I drove around for hours, circling neighborhoods where I couldn't afford the rent. The truth was, I didn't have enough saved to move out immediately. I'd spent most of my earnings helping my parents with groceries, bills, and emergencies. When exhaustion finally hit, I pulled into an empty parking lot and reclined my seat. The chill seeped through my coat as I realized I was about to spend my first night ever sleeping in my car, while my family slept soundly, probably thinking they'd done nothing wrong. The next morning, I returned just to grab the rest of my things. My old bedroom door was wide open. Josh and Kayla were already measuring the walls. Kayla beamed. "Oh, good. You're here. Can you help us move some stuff out? We want to get started today." I stood frozen. Mom popped her head in behind me. "Liv, don't be selfish. This is for the baby. You'll understand one day when you have children." But I knew, deep down, I wouldn't understand. Not ever. I didn't say a word. I turned around, walked out, and drove away. They didn't follow. And I didn't go back. Not for birthdays, not for holidays. Not even when Dad's health worsened. My phone buzzed with calls I ignored, texts I left unread. The longer I stayed away, the more certain I became. They had chosen Josh and Kayla. I was just the spare. Until years later, when out of nowhere, I woke up to 46 missed calls from my mother, and a single text from Josh that chilled me to the bone. "Please, Liv. We need you." But after everything they did, the question wasn't why they were calling now. It was whether I would even answer. The first year after I left was the hardest. I slept in my car for almost 3 weeks, rotating between parking lots, gas stations, and the occasional generous friend's driveway. I didn't want to tell anyone how bad it was. Shame clung to me like a second skin. When I finally found a small room for rent above a bakery on the edge of town, it wasn't much. The walls were thin, the floor creaked, and the heat barely worked during winter, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I was on my own. and painfully aware of it. I got a second job at a local coffee shop to make ends meet. The pay wasn't great, but it covered enough to keep me off the streets. Nights were spent hunched over a tiny desk with my laptop, scouring online job boards, hoping for something better. Months passed, and the calls from my family slowed, then stopped altogether. No one came looking for me. No one apologized. It was like I had simply been erased. But life, somehow, kept going. The second year, I landed a position as an administrative assistant for a small marketing firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I saved every extra cent, cooking cheap meals and skipping every luxury. I learned how to patch holes in my secondhand clothes and fix a leaky faucet without calling for help. The third year, I was promoted. Then again the year after. Slowly, the cracks in my life began to fill. The tiny room above the bakery turned into a modest apartment. I got health insurance, a retirement account, all the things my parents told me I'd never manage without them. I didn't just survive. I grew. While Josh and Kayla were likely painting their perfect nursery and hosting baby showers, I was attending night classes, working toward a business certification. It was exhausting, but every passing day made me stronger, more independent. By the fifth year, I was leading projects, managing people, and finally earning enough to feel like I wasn't just getting by. I was building something. My apartment was still small, but it felt warm. Filled with secondhand furniture, I restored myself, framed photos of new friends, and the satisfaction of knowing every inch of it was mine. I didn't hear much from home. Occasionally, a friend from town would mention running into my mother or seeing photos of Josh's growing family on social media. I never looked them up. I didn't want to know. I couldn't afford to care. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. Every holiday season, every birthday, I thought maybe they'd reach out with something more than a half-hearted text or a stiff Happy Holidays message. But they never did. It became obvious they weren't just busy. I'd been replaced. And so I moved on. I built a quiet, simple life. I started volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring girls who reminded me too much of myself at that age. Eager to please, always sacrificing, always putting themselves last. I poured into them the love and wisdom I had once craved from my own family. By year 7, I was proud of what I'd become. Then, out of nowhere, they found me. It was a rainy Thursday morning when I saw them. 46 missed calls stacked on my lock screen. Mom, Josh, Kayla, even Dad, who hadn't called me in years. Their texts were desperate. Please call us. We need you. It's about Dad. It's serious. Olivia, please come home. Home. As if that place could still be called that. I stared at my phone for a long time, heart pounding. The part of me that still longed for family, for belonging, wanted to answer immediately. But the other part, the part that had learned the hard way what their love really meant, hesitated. What could they possibly want from me after all this time? They hadn't needed me when they took my room, when they left me out in the cold, when I was sleeping in a freezing car. But now? Now they suddenly needed me? I turned my phone over, face down on the kitchen table. For the first time in years, I wasn't sure what to do. The Olivia they remembered might have come running, but I wasn't her anymore. I didn't answer them right away. In fact, I didn't answer at all. I spent the next 2 days going through the motions of my life, making coffee, attending meetings, walking through the park after work. But those 46 missed calls haunted me. Every time I glanced at my phone, it felt like a small weight pressed deeper into my chest. Finally, on the third night, curiosity won. I called Mom's number, fully expecting it to go to voicemail, but she picked up on the first ring. Olivia? Olivia, is that you? She gasped, like I was some long-lost child instead of the daughter she had practically thrown out. My stomach turned. What's going on? Her voice cracked. It's your father. He's sick. Really sick. I stayed silent, unsure whether to feel concerned or just numb. He had a stroke 2 weeks ago, she continued. He's not recovering well. He's confused most of the time. Josh and Kayla have been handling everything, but her voice faltered. We need you. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. You need me? I asked, bitterness slipping out before I could stop it. There was a pause. Olivia, please don't be like this. We're family. We need to come together. The audacity. I thought about all those nights I'd spent shivering in the car, wondering why my so-called family hadn't needed me then. Still, I forced myself to ask, why now? You made it very clear I wasn't part of the family anymore when you gave my room away like it was nothing. Mom's breath hitched. It was never about that. We were under pressure with the baby coming, and you're strong. We thought you'd land on your feet. We didn't know it was that hard for you. I clenched my jaw. That hard? Like I hadn't been sleeping in parking lots? Before I could respond, Mom whispered, Josh and Kayla moved into their own place last year. The house is empty now. We could really use your help. So there it was. Not just Dad's illness. The house, their house, was too much for them now. They needed a caregiver, a replacement, a daughter again, but only because they were desperate. And they hadn't even asked if I was willing. It was just assumed, like always. I didn't give her an answer. I told her I'd think about it, then hung up. The next day, Josh called. Unlike Mom, he didn't bother with pleasantries. Look, Liv, Dad needs help. We all do. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I almost laughed. Harder than it needs to be? You know, I said, keeping my voice steady. I never got an apology. Josh sighed. Liv, that was years ago. We were all under a lot of stress. You've had time to move on. But I hadn't moved on. Not fully, because I had never been given the chance. They had moved on the moment I drove away, and now they expected me to do what I'd always done. Quietly step in, clean up the mess, and put my own life on hold. Later that night, I visited the old neighborhood. I parked outside the house I used to call home, watching from a distance as dim lights flickered behind the curtains. The paint was peeling, the yard unkempt. The place that once seemed so full of life looked hollow. Mom sat on the front porch, wrapped in a shawl, staring out at the empty street. For a brief second, I almost pitied her. But then I remembered that cold night when I'd packed up my life and left without so much as a backward glance, because none of them had cared enough to stop me. And here's the thing. I had built something. Maybe it wasn't a big house or a picture-perfect family, but it was mine. I had friends who respected me, a job I loved, and a quiet, stable life far from their manipulations. As I watched Mom sitting there, unaware of my presence, I realized something. They weren't looking for me because they missed me. They were looking for me because they needed me to sacrifice, to save, to smooth things over. And now I wasn't sure if I would. I told myself I was just going for closure. That's the lie I clung to as I drove down the familiar streets, watching the town I had once called home pass by like the background of someone else's story. I hadn't been back in almost 8 years. Not for birthdays, not for holidays, not for anything. But now, with my father's health in question and my phone still buzzing every few hours with missed calls, I found myself pulling into the driveway I used to bike up as a child. The house looked worse up close. The paint had peeled further, the once well-tended garden was now overgrown, and the porch sagged slightly to one side. I hesitated, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to put the car in reverse and never look back. But I didn't. I rang the doorbell. It was Mom who answered, and for a split second I saw relief flicker across her face. "Oh, Olivia," she breathed, pulling me into a hug before I could stop her. I stood stiff in her arms, unsure if I should return it. Inside, the house felt colder than I remembered. The walls were bare where family photos used to hang, and the familiar smell of vanilla and cinnamon that usually accompanied Mom's baking was absent. It felt like walking into a stranger's home. Dad was in the living room, sunken into his recliner, looking smaller somehow. He barely registered me at first. When his eyes finally found mine, they were clouded, confused. "Liv?" he rasped. I nodded silently. I had braced myself for anger, guilt, resentment, but nothing prepared me for the frail version of the man who had once seemed so strong. Mom offered me tea like nothing had ever happened. Sit. I'll make us something warm. As I sat on the edge of the couch, Josh and Kayla appeared from the kitchen. Kayla looked tired, her hair hastily tied back, and Josh, well, he looked exactly the same, entitled and comfortable. "Glad you finally showed up," Josh said, arms crossed like I was late to some appointment they'd scheduled. Kayla nudged him. "Josh." I stared at him. I wasn't sure I'd come at all. He shrugged. "We just thought you'd want to help Dad. He's struggling." I noticed Kayla's eyes flick toward Mom, as if sharing some silent communication, but I couldn't read it. As we sipped tea, they danced around the real reason they had called me back. They told me about Dad's declining health, how hard it had been taking care of him, how exhausting it was. "How long has it been like this?" I asked. Josh shifted. "A couple of years." 2 years. They'd known he was getting worse for 2 whole years and only now thought to contact me. Mom placed her cup down. "We've done our best, but with your father needing round-the-clock care, and with Josh and Kayla juggling the kids and work, it's just too much." I stared at them, realization dawning. "You want me to move back?" I said flatly. No one spoke. "You want me to take care of Dad?" I continued. "To quit my job, uproot my life, and just slide back into the space you left for me years ago when you tossed me out?" "Olivia, don't make it sound like that," Mom said, her voice trembling. "This is about family, about doing the right thing." I leaned back against the worn couch cushions, letting the silence stretch. "You never even asked if I was okay," I said quietly. "Not when I left. Not the first winter I was living out of my car. Not when I disappeared. I wasn't family then. But now that you need someone to clean up the mess, suddenly I'm family again." Josh threw his hands up. "Look, you're obviously still holding a grudge." "A grudge?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You think this is a grudge? I sacrificed years of my life for this family. I stayed when everyone else left. I gave you everything, and you gave me nothing in return." The room fell uncomfortably silent. Dad blinked slowly, barely following the conversation. Kayla finally whispered, "We didn't know it was that bad." I stood. "You didn't care enough to find out?" Mom's eyes welled with tears. "Please, Olivia, you're the only one who can help." I looked at them, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the disposable daughter, the helper, the afterthought. I felt like someone who had built a life they couldn't begin to understand. "You'll get by," I said calmly, heading for the door. "You always do when it benefits you." I left them sitting there, stunned as I stepped out into the cold evening air. But I knew this wasn't over. Something told me they weren't finished needing me yet. The phone calls didn't stop after that visit. If anything, they got worse. Missed calls, voicemails, texts. At first, I ignored them, but a part of me, the part that still wondered if maybe, just maybe, they had changed, kept reading every word. And then one evening, buried between the frantic, "We need you," and "Please just come home" texts, I found it. It's about the house. "Please, Olivia, call us." The house? The next day, against my better judgment, I drove back. Not because I wanted to help, but because I needed to know. I needed to hear it from them. Mom greeted me at the door like I was a savior returned from war. Josh and Kayla were already seated at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of them. Kayla's eyes were puffy, like she'd been crying. Josh, for once, wasn't wearing that smug expression. He looked downright nervous. They barely wasted time on small talk before Mom launched into it. "We're going to lose the house, Olivia." I blinked. "What?" Mom rubbed at her temples. "Your father's medical bills. They're more than we expected. We took out a second mortgage, and Josh tried to help, but it's not enough." Josh chimed in. We thought once Dad got better, things would stabilize. But it's not happening. So you want me to bail you out? I said flatly. Mom flinched. No, no, we just thought maybe with the money you've saved you could help. Just to keep the house. We'd pay you back. And there it was. The real reason. It wasn't about Dad. It wasn't about family. It was about the house. The same house they kicked me out of like I was some ungrateful tenant. The same house where Josh and Kayla measured my walls for their nursery without so much as asking if I had anywhere to go. Kayla sniffled. We're desperate, Olivia. The kids need this place. We put everything into remodeling it when the baby came. I stared at her. The baby she spoke of wasn't a baby anymore. From what little I'd gathered, Josh and Kayla had 2 kids now. They had moved into their own place, sure. But it wasn't out of independence. It was because they couldn't afford to keep up the house without me. You remodeled my room into your nursery, I said, my voice colder than I meant it to be. And now you want me to save the house you pushed me out of? Josh gritted his teeth. It was years ago. Don't be petty. Petty? I snapped. I slept in my car while you painted the walls for your baby. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I know we made mistakes, Liv. But please, think of the kids. They deserve to grow up here like you did. I felt the sharp sting of betrayal rise up again, but this time it didn't overwhelm me. I was calm, detached. I glanced at Dad, slumped in his chair, oblivious to most of it. He wasn't the villain here. He had probably gone along with whatever Mom and Josh wanted, like always. You all had years to reach out, I said quietly. But you only did when you needed something. We thought you'd understand, Mom whispered. Understand what? I asked. That you only love me when I'm useful? That you only remember I exist when you need me to fix your mess? You didn't care when I was gone. You didn't care when I had nothing. Josh leaned forward, lowering his voice. Olivia, we could lose everything. This is about more than you. No, I said firmly, standing. It's always been about everyone but me. I expected them to argue, to beg, to manipulate me with guilt like they always did. But instead, they just sat there, silent, defeated. I walked out, closing the door behind me. As I got into my car, I knew this was different. They weren't just asking for help. They were depending on me. They'd built their entire plan on the assumption that I'd still be the Olivia who always sacrificed, always put them first. But they had no idea who I'd become. This time, I held the cards, and for once, I wasn't sure I'd be playing them in their favor. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. It almost felt like they'd given up. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd realize they couldn't guilt me anymore. But deep down, I knew better. They were regrouping, finding another angle. They always did. And sure enough, on Sunday afternoon, I came home to find an envelope wedged under my apartment door. No return address, just my name and Mom's handwriting. Inside was a letter. No pleas, no apologies, just desperation disguised as sentiment. Your father's condition is worse. He doesn't have much time. Please, Olivia, this is bigger than old arguments. Please help us keep the house. The kids need it. We need it. There it was again. The house. Always the house. Not, I'm sorry we abandoned you. Not, we miss you. Just, we need you. I sat with that letter for hours. I thought about the cold nights in my car, the silence on every birthday, the years I spent rebuilding my life brick by brick without them. I thought about the girls I mentored, the ones who had been cast aside by their own families and still held on to hope, just like I used to. And then I made a decision. The next morning, I drove back one last time. When Mom opened the door, relief washed over her face so quickly it almost made me laugh. Josh and Kayla were already seated at the kitchen table, eyes bloodshot and expectant. I'm here, I said, calm and steady. But I didn't come to save you. Mom blinked. What? I stepped fully into the house, closing the door behind me. I came to give you closure, just like you gave me 8 years ago. Josh scowled. Olivia, don't be dramatic. You think this is dramatic? I said, raising an eyebrow. You've barely acknowledged me for years. You kicked me out for convenience, and now you want me to patch up your life like nothing happened? We're desperate, Kayla whispered. Please. You've been desperate, I corrected. You just hoped I'd be desperate enough to say yes. Mom tried to interrupt, but I held up a hand. I didn't just move on. I made a life. I built something. Without your help, without your love, without this house. I motioned to the decaying walls and fading photos. I have friends who are more like family than you've ever been. I pulled out a small envelope from my coat pocket. Mom's eyes widened, thinking it was a check, but it wasn't. It was a signed letter, addressed to my lawyer, officially declining any claim or inheritance related to the house. I don't want it, I said. I want nothing to do with it. Josh's jaw dropped. You're walking away? After everything? After everything, I confirmed. And let me be clear, I'm not angry anymore. I'm done. Mom's lips trembled. But you'll come back for the funeral, at least? For your father? The question stung, but I stood firm. If I do, it won't be for you. I took one last look around the place that had once been home. The cracks in the walls, the faded memories, the ghosts of a family that had chosen convenience over love. I felt nothing but peace. As I stepped outside, Mom called after me. You'll regret this. We're still family, Olivia. I turned back for just a second. No, Mom. Family wouldn't have left me out in the cold. And then I left. A year later, I was standing inside my own small shop, the one I opened with the savings they thought I'd spend on their crumbling house. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Framed on the wall behind the counter was the letter Mom had left under my door, next to a photo of me and the girls from the youth center, laughing during a workshop I'd organized. I built something better than they ever offered me. I had community. I had peace. I had myself. Through mutual acquaintances, I later learned they did lose the house. Josh and Kayla moved into a small rental. Mom struggled with mounting debt, and Dad passed away quietly a few months later. I didn't go back. Not out of spite, but because I had already buried everything I needed to a long time ago. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't anger or payback. It's simply refusing to be who they expect you to be. They expected me to come running. I didn't, and I never will.